Amelia Vance looked at the man she had been married to for 5 years, and she felt nothing but a profound, weary disappointment. Ethan stood before her, his shoulders slightly slumped, his expression placid as always. It was that placidity that infuriated her most. It was, she thought, the face of a man who expected nothing from the world and was therefore never disappointed. It was the face of mediocrity. "You can't be serious, Amelia," he said, his voice a low, calm rumble that vibrated with a patience she had long ago begun to interpret as weakness. "I have never been more serious in my life," she replied, her own voice sharp, cutting through the opulent silence of their marble-floored foyer. "Julian is staying in the guest room. Father is in the second guest room. The party is tomorrow, and it is for important people, Ethan. People who have ambition. People who are going somewhere. I will not have you moping around, casting a gray cloud over everything with your quiet resignation." The words were cruel, and a small forgotten part of her knew it. But that part was buried under years of resentment, fanned into a bonfire by her father's constant belittling of her choice in a husband and the recent intoxicating influence of Julian Croft. Ethan's gaze didn't waver. He simply absorbed the insult, his dark eyes holding a depth she had never bothered to try and plumb. "So where exactly am I supposed to sleep?" Amelia gestured dismissively toward the back of the house, a flick of her wrist that was as imperious as it was insulting. "The porch. There's a chaise lounge out there. You can take a blanket. It's not as if it's snowing." He stared at her for a long, unbroken moment. The silence stretched, thick with everything that had gone wrong between them. She expected him to argue, to protest, to show some flicker of anger or wounded pride. He did not. He simply gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "All right," he said. That one word was more infuriating than any argument. It was acceptance. It was surrender. To Amelia, it was the final confirmation of the man she thought she had married. A man with no spine, no fire, no worth. She watched as he turned, walked to the hall closet, and retrieved a thick wool blanket. He didn't look back at her as he slid the glass door open and stepped out into the cool night air of their manicured, soulless backyard. The door clicked shut, leaving her alone in the cavernous house. A brief, cold sliver of doubt pierced her confidence, but she pushed it away. This was necessary. This was the beginning of her new life, a life of glamour and influence, a life with men like Julian. Ethan was just dead weight, and it was time to cut him loose. She was confident. She was in control. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly comprehend, was that the quiet man now making a bed on her porch furniture was not Ethan Vance, freelance financial consultant. He was EV, the phantom of venture capital, the unseen kingmaker behind a $34 billion empire that could buy and sell her entire world 100 times over. And by banishing him to the porch, she hadn't cut dead weight. She had just lit the fuse on a bomb that would obliterate the fragile, artificial life she held so dear. Within a week, everything she thought she knew about power, wealth, and worth would be turned to ash. Thank you for joining us for this story. We love bringing these tales of justice and revelation to you. If you're enjoying it so far, we'd be so grateful if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss what happens next. And we're always curious where our stories are reaching. Let us know in the comments what city or country you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the night that changed everything. The chill of the night air was a stark contrast to the sterile, climate-controlled perfection of the house. Ethan settled onto the cushioned chaise lounge, the scratchy wool blanket a poor defense against the creeping cold. From inside, he could hear the faint, melodic chime of Amelia's laughter as she spoke on the phone, likely to Julian or her father, confirming the final details of the grand humiliation she had planned for him. He was not just to be absent from the party, he was to be made a non-entity in his own home. He closed his eyes, not in an attempt to sleep, but to retreat into the one place he had always maintained absolute control: his mind. It hadn't always been this way. He remembered their beginning 5 years prior. He had been drawn to Amelia's vibrancy, her fire. She was a woman who seemed to burn with a desire for life, a stark contrast to the quiet, analytical world he inhabited. He was EV even then, the architect of Vanguard Capital. But he had grown weary of the sycophants, the endless demands, the isolation that came with a fortune so vast it was an abstraction. He had created the persona of Ethan Vance, a simple consultant, as a shield, a way to find something real. For a time, he thought he had found it with her. She had claimed to love his calm nature, calling it a soothing anchor in her sometimes chaotic world. But the anchor, over time, began to feel like a drag. The first cracks appeared about 2 years into the marriage, instigated, as always, by her father. Marcus Thorne was a man who had built his life and identity on the rickety scaffolding of social status. A senior executive at a mid-tier manufacturing firm, Thorne Industries, he carried himself with the unearned gravitas of a titan of industry. He saw Ethan's quiet profession and modest lifestyle not as a choice, but as a failing, a personal insult to the Thorne family name. Ethan recalled a dinner at Marcus's country club, a place reeking of old leather and older money. Marcus had held court, loudly asking Ethan across the table, "So, Ethan, still consulting? Still playing with your little spreadsheets? Amelia tells me you passed on that management opportunity. A man has to have ambition, son. You can't expect to coast on charm forever." The other guests, all associates of Marcus, had offered thin, sympathetic smiles, while Amelia had stared intently at her plate, her silence a form of complicity. Ethan had merely replied, "I'm content with my work, Marcus. It's challenging enough for me." Marcus had clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture that was meant to seem avuncular but felt deeply condescending. That's the spirit. Find contentment in the small things. Not everyone is cut out for the big leagues. That night, on the drive home, Amelia had been quiet. Then she had said, "You could have at least defended yourself. You let him walk all over you." "What was there to defend?" Ethan had asked. He stated his opinion. I stated my position. There was no conflict. No conflict? Ethan, he called you a nobody in front of his entire world, and you just sat there. You made me look foolish. That was the turning point. He realized she wasn't embarrassed for him. She was embarrassed by him. Her love was conditional, predicated on the reflection of her own status in the eyes of others. The arrival of Julian Croft 6 months ago had been the accelerant on a fire that was already smoldering. Julian was everything Ethan was not: loud, ostentatious, a peacock of a man who called himself a lifestyle architect. He dressed in designer clothes, drove a leased sports car, and spoke in a cascade of buzzwords about synergy, disruption, and personal branding. He saw the world through the lens of a social media feed, and he had immediately identified Ethan as a threat to the curated perfection of the brand he wanted to build with Amelia. Now, lying on the porch, Ethan pulled out a small, unassuming object from the inner pocket of his jacket. It was a leather-bound journal, its cover softened and worn with years of use. To Amelia, it was his little book of dreams, a pathetic collection of his inconsequential thoughts she'd once mocked. In reality, it was the foundational document of his empire. Within its pages were the handwritten theses for every major fund Vanguard Capital had ever launched. The notes on the AI startup that had yielded a 10,000% return. The initial schematic for the biotech merger that had reshaped an industry. The scribbled observations that led to his backing of 3 different companies that were now household names. It was a document worth billions, a testament to a lifetime of seeing what others could not. He opened it to a fresh page. The spine creaked softly in the quiet of the night. Under the faint glow of a security light, he began to write. He wasn't writing about his anger or his hurt. He was past that. He was doing what he always did when faced with a complex problem. He was analyzing the variables. He was outlining a strategy. He wrote three names: Amelia, Marcus, Julian. Beside each, he began to list assets, liabilities, and exposure points. This was no longer a marriage, it was a hostile takeover. And the man they had underestimated, the man they had cast out into the cold, was about to liquidate their entire world. The sounds from inside the house grew louder as the first guests for Amelia's pre-party gathering arrived. Laughter, sharp and brittle, echoed through the glass. Ethan could hear Julian's booming voice, already holding court. True success is about shedding limitations, Julian pontificated, his voice carrying clearly through the sliding door. Whether it's a bad investment, a bad mindset, or a bad partner, you have to be ruthless. Ethan lay on the chaise lounge, the cold seeping into his bones, and a slow, cold smile touched his lips. He couldn't agree more. The party inside was a symphony of self-congratulation. The air, thick with expensive perfume and the aroma of catered hors d'oeuvres, vibrated with the sound of people who believed they were the center of the universe. Amelia moved through the crowd, a radiant smile fixed on her face. She felt alive, vibrant, as if she had finally shed a heavy gray coat. Every compliment on the house, every admiring glance at Julian by her side, felt like a validation of the choice she had made. "Amelia, darling, the house is simply divine," cooed a woman whose face was a testament to the art of cosmetic surgery. "You have such impeccable taste." "Thank you, Cynthia," Amelia replied, her voice smooth as silk. "I've been thinking of making a few changes recently, streamlining things." Her eyes flickered toward the dark glass of the porch door, a silent, smug acknowledgement of the change she had already made. Her father, Marcus Thorne, was in his element. He stood with a group of men, a glass of scotch in his hand, pontificating on the state of the market. He had cornered a junior bank manager who looked desperately for an escape. "The key is bold action," Marcus declared, puffing out his chest. "In business, in life. You see a weakness, you exploit it. You see dead weight, you cut it. No room for sentiment. It's what I've always told Amelia." Julian Croft, the guest of honor, was the undisputed star. He was a whirlwind of charisma, moving from group to group, dispensing unsolicited advice like a king scattering coins to peasants. He spoke of paradigm shifts and value creation, his words vague but delivered with such unshakable confidence that people nodded along, afraid to admit they had no idea what he was talking about. He found Amelia by the grand fireplace, pulling her close. "You see?" he whispered in her ear, his breath warm against her skin. "This is your world, not that gray little life you were living. This is where you belong, with winners." "He didn't even fight it," Amelia whispered back, a thrill running through her. "I told him to sleep on the porch and he just agreed." Julian let out a short, barking laugh. "Of course he did. What did you expect? A lion's roar from a lamb? Men like him, they know their place. They exist to serve as a cautionary tale for men like me." He squeezed her hand. "Tonight is about us, about our future." Outside, Ethan felt the temperature drop another few degrees. He pulled the blanket tighter around his shoulders. He wasn't listening to the party anymore. He was focused. He had his phone out, the screen brightness turned down to its lowest setting. He wasn't scrolling through social media or reading the news. He was logged into a proprietary encrypted network, the central nervous system of Vanguard Capital. His interface was deceptively simple, lines of text and data streaming in a secure feed. With a few taps, he pulled up a complete dossier on Thorne Industries. It was, as he had long suspected, a company running on fumes and legacy. Decent cash flow, but stagnant, bloated with legacy costs and a complete lack of innovation. Marcus ran it like a personal fiefdom, promoting cronies and resisting any change that threatened his comfortable perch. For years, Ethan had resisted the urge to interfere, respecting the boundary between his life as Ethan Vance and his work as EV. It was a matter of principle. But Marcus and Amelia had systematically dismantled that boundary. They had brought the battle to him, into his home. They had just chosen the wrong battlefield. He scrolled through market data, analyst reports, and ownership breakdowns. Thorne Industries was publicly traded, but the Thorne family and its allies held a controlling interest, making it resistant to outside influence. Resistant, but not invulnerable. Ethan's mind, a finely tuned machine for identifying patterns and weaknesses, saw a path. It would be expensive. It would be aggressive. It would be a brutal public fight. It would be, in a word, perfect. He typed a short, encrypted message to his chief strategist, a man named David Chen, who had been with him for 20 years and knew him simply as Chief. The message was brief. Initiate Phoenix Protocol. Target Thorne Industries. Preliminary acquisition analysis by 0800 Zulu. This is a Priority 1 directive. The Phoenix Protocol was a code name they hadn't used in a decade. It was reserved for the most aggressive, high-stakes, hostile takeovers. It meant deploying overwhelming financial force to acquire and restructure a target, often against the will of its current leadership. It was corporate warfare. A reply came back in less than 60 seconds. Phoenix confirmed. Analysis underway. Glad to see you're back, Chief. Ethan closed the app. He then opened another, this one a secure link to his personal accounts. A labyrinthine structure of trusts and holding companies so complex that it would take a team of forensic accountants a decade to unravel. He moved a sum of money from one account to another, a figure with 9 zeros, transferring it into a ready access fund for the acquisition. The entire transaction, involving more money than anyone at the party inside could conceive of, took less than 30 seconds. He put the phone down and looked through the glass. He saw Amelia, radiant in her expensive dress, laughing at something Julian had said. He saw her father, puffed up with self-importance. They were celebrating a victory they didn't understand, over an enemy they couldn't see. They were toasting to the future, utterly oblivious to the fact that their future had just been bought. And the man they had exiled to the cold was now the one who owned it. The night was far from over, but for them, the end had already begun. The morning sun cast long, accusatory shadows across the patio, illuminating the debris of the previous night's success. Empty glasses, discarded napkins, and the faint, stale smell of champagne hung in the air. Ethan folded the wool blanket with methodical precision and left it on the chaise lounge. He slid the glass door open and stepped inside. The house was silent, a tomb of post-party exhaustion. He walked into the kitchen to make a cup of coffee, the simple ritual a grounding force in the swirling chaos of his life. He moved with a quiet efficiency that was his hallmark, a man comfortable in his own space. But it was no longer his space. Amelia appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a silk robe, her hair a mess, her face puffy from sleep and wine. The radiance of the night before had curdled into a sour, morning-after irritability. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice raspy. "Making coffee," Ethan replied, not turning around. "Don't," she snapped. "I have a cleaner coming. Just stay out of the way. Actually, you can make yourself useful. Start clearing the patio. They left a disaster out there." It was not a request. It was an order, delivered to a subordinate. Ethan slowly turned, a black ceramic mug in his hand. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. For a fleeting second, he considered it. He considered walking out the door and never coming back, letting the intricate machinery of his plan run its course without another word. But that wasn't his way. The strategy required him to see it through, to remain in place until the final, decisive moment. It was the principle of the thing. "Of course," he said, his voice even. He spent the next hour clearing the remnants of their celebration. He picked up cigarette butts from the planters, wiped wine rings from the glass tabletops, and gathered empty bottles into a recycling bin. Each piece of trash felt like a physical manifestation of their contempt for him. He worked not with anger, but with a detached, chilling focus. He was a general surveying the battlefield after a skirmish, gathering intelligence for the war to come. He was just finishing when Julian Croft emerged onto the patio, stretching theatrically in the morning sun. He was wearing silk pajama pants and a self-satisfied smirk. He looked at Ethan, surrounded by garbage bags, and chuckled. "Ah, the man of the house," Julian said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Or should I say, the man outside the house. Keeping things tidy, I see. Good man." Ethan said nothing. He simply tied the top of the last garbage bag. Julian sauntered over, leaning against the railing. "Listen, Ethan, Amelia's told me about your situation. The whole freelance consultant thing. It's a tough gig. No stability, no real upside. I get it." He paused, as if weighing a decision of great importance. "I know some people. I could make a call, maybe get you an entry-level position somewhere, something with a regular paycheck. It would give you a little dignity, you know." The offer was a masterpiece of passive aggression, a poisoned dart disguised as a helping hand. It was designed to humiliate, to establish dominance, to reinforce Ethan's status as a lesser being. Ethan straightened up, turning to face Julian directly. The height difference was minimal, but in that moment, the chasm between them was immeasurable. "Thank you for the offer, Julian," Ethan said, his voice quiet but firm. "But I'm not looking for a job." "Suit yourself," Julian shrugged, already bored. "But a man who can't provide for his wife shouldn't be surprised when she starts looking for a man who can." He winked, a final, sleazy flourish, before heading back inside. An hour later, Marcus Thorne arrived. He didn't bother to knock, using his own key to enter the house he still subtly treated as his own property. He found Ethan in the study, reading a book. Marcus didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Amelia told me you slept on the porch," he began, his voice a low growl of disapproval. "I have to say, Ethan, I didn't think my opinion of you could get any lower, but you continue to surprise me. Have you no shame? No pride?" "I was asked to," Ethan replied simply, not looking up from his book. "Asked to?" Marcus scoffed. "A man isn't asked to leave his own bed. He has a spine. He commands respect. You should be on your knees thanking God that a woman like Amelia has put up with your pathetic lack of ambition for this long. She deserves a partner, not a passenger." Ethan slowly closed his book, the soft thud of the cover echoing in the tense silence. He placed it on the desk beside him. Next to the book lay his worn leather journal. He let his fingers rest on the cover for a moment, the familiar texture a source of calm, quiet power. "I believe I have provided for her quite well, Marcus," he said, his voice still level, still maddeningly calm. Marcus let out a harsh, barking laugh. "Provided? You call this providing? This house? Her car? That's all from the trust I set up for her. You contribute nothing. You are a leech, Ethan, and it's time someone told you to your face." The cruelty was breathtaking in its totality. The house, the cars, their entire lifestyle. It was all paid for by Ethan, drawn from a sliver of his vast fortune. The trust Marcus spoke of was a modest fund that paid for Amelia's shopping habit and little else. It was a lie they had all agreed to believe because the truth, that Amelia's mediocre husband was the sole architect of their affluence, was too inconvenient for their narrative. Ethan stood up. He walked to the window, looking out at the perfectly manicured lawn. The final piece of his strategy clicked into place. He had planned to wait, to let the takeover play out behind the scenes. But Marcus's words, the sheer, unadulterated arrogance, changed the timeline. The lesson needed to be more direct, more personal. He took out his phone. He dialed David Chen. "David," he said, his voice low. "Chief," David's voice came back, crisp and professional. "The analysis is complete. Thorne Industries is ripe for the picking. Weak board, complacent CEO, undervalued assets. We can have it within the week." "Accelerate the timeline," Ethan said, his eyes fixed on Marcus, who was still watching him with a look of utter contempt. I want it done by market open tomorrow, whatever it takes. This is no longer just business. There was a brief pause on the other end. Understood, Chief. The Phoenix Protocol is now at maximum velocity. Consider it done. Ethan hung up. He turned back to Marcus. You were saying something about ambition, Marcus? He asked, a cold, dangerous light entering his eyes for the first time. Marcus, blinded by his own hubris, saw nothing but the same old placid Ethan. He had no idea he was a dead man walking, having a casual conversation with his own executioner. The next few days passed in a state of suspended animation, a bubble of serene calm before the inevitable storm. For Amelia, Julian, and Marcus, it was a period of triumph. They had, in their minds, successfully excised the weakness from their lives. Ethan was a ghost in the house, a silent, peripheral figure they could now easily ignore. He ate his meals alone. He spent his time in the study or walking in the garden. His compliance was, to them, the final proof of his defeat. They decided the time was right to make the separation official. It wouldn't be a messy, emotional confrontation. It would be a civilized, almost corporate affair. They would call it an intervention, a meeting designed for Ethan's own good, to help him understand that the marriage was over and it was time for him to move on. It was a kindness, they told themselves, a way to give him a gentle landing. The meeting was set for Wednesday evening in the grand living room, a space with soaring ceilings and cold, modern furniture. It was a room designed for statements, not for comfort. Marcus and Julian arrived together, both dressed in expensive suits, looking like a corporate hit squad. Amelia wore a severe, dark blue dress, her face set in a mask of determined pity. They arranged themselves on the large white sofa, a united front of judgment. Amelia sent a text to Ethan, who was in the study. We need to talk. In the living room. Now. A few moments later, Ethan appeared in the doorway. He was not dressed in a suit. He wore simple dark trousers and a soft gray cashmere sweater. He looked neither defeated nor defiant. He looked, as always, composed. His calm presence was a stark contrast to the performative gravity of the three people waiting for him. Ethan, thank you for coming, Amelia began, her voice rehearsed. Please, have a seat. She gestured to a lone armchair placed opposite the sofa, a piece of staging that cast him as a subject being interviewed. Ethan walked into the room, but he did not sit down. Instead, he walked to the large, slate-gray coffee table that separated the sofa from the armchair. In his hand was his worn, brown leather journal. He placed it on the table with a soft, definitive thud. The sound was small, but it seemed to absorb all the oxygen in the room. The symbolic object, the book of his little dreams, was now at the center of their confrontation. He remained standing, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. He looked at the three of them, his gaze moving from Amelia's practiced solemnity to Julian's smug smirk, to Marcus's stern, impatient glare. I believe you wanted to talk, Ethan said. His voice was not the voice of a man about to be dismissed. It was the voice of a chairman calling a board meeting to order. The unexpected shift in posture threw Amelia off her script for a moment. Yes, Ethan, we're worried about you. This situation, it's not healthy for anyone. We've been talking, and we all agree that what we agree on, Marcus interrupted, always impatient, is that this charade is over. The marriage has been a mistake for years. Amelia has been unhappy. You haven't stepped up. It's time for you to move out and give her the chance to have the life she deserves. Julian leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, adopting the posture of a reasonable mediator. Look, Ethan, mate, there's no shame in it. Sometimes things just don't work out. Amelia is ready to move into a new phase of her life, one with more dynamism. We're prepared to be very generous with the separation agreement, considering your financial situation. The condescension was layered so thick it was almost suffocating. They spoke of his financial situation, of their generosity, as if they held all the cards. They saw a man standing alone, a quiet failure they were about to magnanimously discard. Ethan let the silence hang in the air after Julian finished speaking. He didn't look angry. He didn't look hurt. He looked interested, like a scientist observing a peculiar species of insect. "I see," he said slowly. He let his gaze fall upon the journal on the table. "You've made your assessment of the situation based on a certain set of assumptions." He then looked up, and his eyes were clear and sharp. "The assumption that I am a man of no means. The assumption that you are in a position of power. The assumption that you have any say whatsoever in what happens next." He took a step closer to the table, his fingers hovering over the journal. "Before you continue with your intervention," he said, the word dripping with an irony so subtle they missed it entirely, "I believe there is some information you are missing, information that might fundamentally alter your perspective." The air in the room grew heavy. The confidence on their faces began to waver, replaced by a flicker of confusion. This was not the reaction of a defeated man. This was the opening move of a game they didn't even know they were playing. The quiet before the storm was over. The first drops of rain had begun to fall. Amelia, determined to regain control of the narrative she had so carefully constructed, took a deep breath and launched into her prepared speech. "Ethan, this isn't about assumptions. It's about reality. I have needs, emotional, financial, social, that you have consistently failed to meet. I've been patient. I have tried to support your endeavors." She gestured vaguely, as if the word endeavors was a euphemism for something unpleasant. "But I can't live a small life anymore. I need a partner who challenges me, who moves in the same circles I aspire to. Julian understands that. My father understands that. It's time for us to part ways, for your sake as much as mine." She finished, her chin held high, a portrait of tragic nobility. Marcus nodded in solemn approval. Julian gave a small, sympathetic smile, as if to say, "She's right, you know." Ethan listened to the entire speech without interruption. When she was done, the silence that followed was profound. He did not react to the insults, veiled and overt. He simply stood there, a pillar of calm in the center of their manufactured drama. Then, he reached down and opened the leather journal on the coffee table. He didn't flip through it. He simply opened it to the first page, which was filled with his neat, compact handwriting. "Thank you for sharing that, Amelia," he said, his voice as smooth and cool as the slate of the table. "You've laid out your position clearly. Now, allow me to clarify mine." He looked directly at her. "You believe I am Ethan Vance, a freelance financial consultant with an estimated net worth of approximately $200,000 and an annual income that barely covers my share of the household expenses, which are, in fact, largely subsidized by your father's trust fund." He paused. "Is that a fair summary of your assessment?" Amelia exchanged a look with her father. "It's a blunt way of putting it, but yes, essentially." "Good," Ethan said. "Clarity is important." He then shifted his gaze to Julian. "And you, Julian, you believe I am a man in need of a real job, someone to whom you can offer an entry-level position out of the kindness of your heart. A cautionary tale." Julian's smirk tightened. "I was just trying to help, mate." Finally, Ethan looked at Marcus. "And you, Marcus, you believe I am a leech, a man with no ambition, no pride, who has been a passenger in your daughter's life, contributing nothing." Marcus crossed his arms, defiant. "The truth hurts, doesn't it?" Ethan gave a slow nod. "The truth does have a way of doing that." He looked down at his journal, then back at them. "The problem is, what you've all been telling yourselves is not the truth. It is a story, a convenient fiction you've constructed to justify your own choices and feelings. The truth is something quite different." He took a breath. "My name is Ethan Vance. That much is true. But it is, for all intents and purposes, a legal fiction I created for my personal life. The world I actually inhabit, the world of business, knows me by another name. Or rather, by my initials." He let the statement hang in the air. My name is Ethan Vance, he repeated softly. E.V. The initials meant nothing to them. They stared at him, their expressions a mixture of pity and confusion. Amelia was the first to break the silence. E.V.? What are you talking about, Ethan? Have you lost your mind? Julian let out a disbelieving laugh. Mate, I think the stress has gotten to you. E.V., are you trying to invent a secret identity? Is this some kind of fantasy role-playing game? Marcus scoffed, shaking his head in disgust. This is pathetic. Truly pathetic. The man has a complete breakdown, and he invents a superhero name for himself. This is worse than I thought. They were laughing at him, openly mocking him. They saw his revelation not as a threat, but as the final, desperate act of a broken man. They thought he was delusional. Ethan's expression did not change. He had anticipated this. He had known they were too insulated by their own arrogance to accept the truth at face value. They would need a demonstration. You're right, Ethan said, his voice calm and steady amidst their derision. You have no reason to believe me. After all, you've spent years cultivating an image of me that is the complete opposite of the truth. It must be difficult to pivot. He reached into his pocket and took out his phone. So let's add some data to the conversation. He tapped the screen a few times and placed the phone on the coffee table, next to the journal. He had dialed a number. A moment later, a voice came through the speaker, a voice that was calm, clear, and carried an unmistakable aura of authority. David here. David, Ethan said, I have you on speaker. I am here with my wife, Amelia, her father, Marcus Thorne, and a gentleman named Julian Croft. They are under some misapprehensions about my professional life. Could you please introduce yourself and your relationship to me? There was a brief pause. Of course, Chief, the voice said. The word chief hung in the air. A small, hard stone dropped into a silent pool. My name is David Chen. I am the Chief Strategy Officer and Managing Partner of Vanguard Capital. I have worked for our founder and CEO for the past 20 years. That founder and CEO is Ethan Vance, who we all know as EV. The laughter in the room died instantly. It was replaced by a stunned, deafening silence. Vanguard Capital. The name was legendary. A venture capital behemoth, a mythical entity known for its ruthless efficiency and king-making power. EV, its founder, was a ghost, a legend in the financial world, a figure whose identity was the subject of endless speculation. Amelia stared at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. That's not possible, she stammered. This is a trick. You hired an actor. Julian, for the first time, looked uncertain. His smirk had vanished, replaced by a pale, slack-jawed confusion. He was a student of wealth and power, and he knew the name Vanguard Capital was not one to be trifled with. Marcus's face had gone ashen. He knew more than the others. He knew Vanguard was not just a company, it was a force of nature. Vanguard? He whispered, the name a curse on his lips. A trick? Ethan said, a hint of amusement in his voice. An interesting theory. David, would you mind? Not at all, Chief, David's voice replied. For anyone in the room with a smartphone, I suggest you check the homepage of the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, or any other major financial news outlet. A press release went out from our firm approximately 5 minutes ago. As one, they scrambled for their phones. Amelia's hands trembled as she fumbled with her device. Julian's fingers flew across his screen. Marcus stared blankly at his own phone, as if afraid of what he would find. The headlines were stark, brutal, and undeniable. Wall Street Journal, the phantom revealed. Vanguard Capital's legendary E is Ethan Vance. Bloomberg, billionaire investor Ethan Vance steps out of the shadows, confirms $34 billion fortune. Forbes, meet Ethan Vance, the quiet consultant who was secretly one of the richest men in the world. The screens of their phones glowed in the dimming light of the living room, each one a death certificate for the world they knew. The reality of it crashed down on them like a physical weight. The quiet man they had mocked. the failure they had pitied, the dead weight they were about to discard. He wasn't just successful, he was a titan, a god in the world they so desperately wanted to belong to. Amelia looked up from her phone, her face a mask of horrified disbelief. Her eyes met Ethan's, and for the first time, she saw him. Not the placid, unambitious husband, but a stranger, a man of terrifying power and depth who had been living beside her, watching, waiting. But Ethan wasn't finished. The revelation of his identity was merely the prelude. The real lesson was yet to come. He picked up his phone, ending the call with David. He then turned his full attention to Marcus Thorne. "Marcus," he said, his voice dropping to a low, conversational tone that was more menacing than any shout. "You spoke earlier of ambition, of bold action, of cutting dead weight. These are principles I also admire." Marcus looked like he was about to have a heart attack. His face, moments before florid with arrogance, was now a pasty, sickly white. Sweat beaded on his forehead. "You mentioned your company," Ethan continued, "Thorne Industries, a fine legacy manufacturing firm, a pillar of the community, I believe you once called it." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "It has, however, been underperforming for years. Stagnant leadership, an unwillingness to innovate, a board of directors composed of the CEO's golfing buddies. In short," Ethan's voice grew cold, precise, "it was a company ripe for acquisition, a company suffering from a weakness that needed to be exploited." He used Marcus's own words, turning them into weapons and firing them back with surgical precision. Marcus began to tremble. What have you done?" "I did what any ambitious man would do, Marcus," Ethan replied. "I saw an undervalued asset and I bought it. Yesterday morning, leveraging a network of subsidiary holding companies, Vanguard Capital initiated and completed a hostile takeover of Thorne Industries. As of 9:01 a.m. Eastern Standard Time this morning, my firm acquired a 58% controlling stake. The board was dissolved an hour ago. You were voted out as CEO unanimously by the new ownership." Ethan took a small, folded document from his jacket pocket and placed it on the table. It was a press release, not yet public. "Thorne Industries is now a wholly owned subsidiary of the Vanguard portfolio," Ethan stated, his voice flat and final. "My company. As you so eloquently put it, Marcus, I cut the dead weight." The room fell into a vortex of silence. The only sound was the ragged, panicked gasps of Marcus Thorne as he stared at the man who had just stolen his entire world, his identity, his legacy, in the space of a single sentence. Julian Croft, the lifestyle architect, looked as if he had seen a ghost. He slowly began to inch away from Amelia on the sofa, a rat deserting a sinking ship. He had built his entire flimsy persona on being able to spot power and attach himself to it. He had just made the single greatest miscalculation of his life. Amelia was frozen. Her mind was a maelstrom of conflicting realities. The man on the porch, the man with no ambition, the man who now owned her father's company, the headlines on her phone, the cold, calm stranger standing before her. None of it made sense. Her entire life had been a lie, but not the lie she thought. She hadn't been trapped with a failure. She had been living with a king who had disguised himself as a peasant, and she had spat on his crown. The shock began to curdle into a desperate, primal panic. Marcus, finally breaking, lunged for his phone, his fingers shaking so badly he could barely unlock it. He tried to call his broker, his CFO, anyone. The calls went straight to voicemail. His contacts, his allies, the entire professional world he had built had already abandoned him. The news was out. Power had shifted. No one takes a call from a deposed king. "No, no, you can't," Marcus stammered, looking at Ethan with wild, pleading eyes. "That company is my life. It was my father's before me. You can't just take it." "I can, and I have," Ethan said, his voice devoid of triumph. It was a simple statement of fact. You taught me the rules yourself, Marcus. No room for sentiment. He then turned his gaze to Julian, the self-proclaimed wealth strategist, who moments before had been offering Ethan career advice, now seemed to shrink into the plush cushions of the sofa. He avoided Ethan's eyes, staring at a fixed point on the expensive rug, his face a mask of pure terror. Ethan didn't need to say a word to him. The silence was his judgment. The utter, complete dismissal of him as a non-entity was a more profound humiliation than any verbal attack could ever be. Julian Croft, the man of influence, had been rendered completely and utterly irrelevant. He was a gnat that had been swatted away without a thought. Finally, Ethan's eyes came to rest on Amelia. The anger, the pity, the years of resentment had vanished from her face, replaced by a raw, hollow shock. She looked at him as if seeing him for the first time, and in a way, she was. This was the moment Ethan had been preparing for. Not the corporate takeover, not the revelation of his wealth. Those were just logistics. This was the true reckoning. He took a small step forward, and it felt like the closing of a great distance between them. For 5 years, he began, his voice quiet, measured, and devastatingly clear. I have listened. I have listened to your father call me a leech. I have listened to your friends offer me their pity. I have listened to you, my wife, express your shame and disappointment in me. He began to catalog the grievances, not with rage, but with the chilling precision of an auditor listing debts. I remember the night at the country club when your father mocked my little spreadsheets and you were angry at me for not causing a scene. You weren't ashamed of his rudeness. You were ashamed of my composure. I remember my birthday 3 years ago when you forgot to invite my family to the party you threw because, as you later admitted, they weren't the right kind of people and you didn't want to have to make excuses for them. I remember every dinner party, every family gathering where I was treated as a piece of furniture you were embarrassed by, a prop in the grand play of your social aspirations. And then, he said, his voice dropping even lower, there was 2 nights ago. You looked at me in the home that I paid for, with the money that I earned, and you told me to sleep on the porch like a dog. You did it to make room for him, he flickered his eyes toward Julian, a man whose only asset is his arrogance. You did it to impress your father, a man whose respect you value more than your own integrity. He let the final, damning charge settle in the silent room. You said you needed a partner, Amelia, but you didn't. You wanted an accessory, a reflection, someone whose perceived success would validate your own sense of self-worth. When you thought I was a man of modest means, you found me worthless. The irony is, the only thing that has changed in the last hour is your perception of my bank account. The man is the same. I am the same man who slept on the porch. I am the same man you have despised for years. He looked at her, his eyes holding not anger, but a deep, profound sadness. The failure in this marriage was not a lack of ambition on my part. It was a lack of character on yours. The truth, stark and brutal, finally shattered Amelia's state of shock. A sob, raw and ugly, tore from her throat. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about everything, about respect, about love, about the colossal, catastrophic failure of her own judgment. She had been handed a diamond, and for 5 years she had mistaken it for a common stone, complaining that it didn't shine brightly enough. The carefully constructed facade of their lives had not just been cracked, it had been pulverized into dust. Marcus was a broken man, muttering to himself, his corporate empire gone. Julian was a ghost, already plotting his escape, desperate to disassociate himself from the blast radius. And Amelia was left in the rubble, staring at the stranger she had married, finally understanding the magnitude of what she had thrown away. The reversal was complete. The humiliated now held all the power, and those who had held the power were now left with nothing but the bitter taste of their own folly. The aftermath was not explosive. It was a slow, crushing implosion. Marcus Thorne, stripped of his title and his company, seemed to age a decade in an hour. The blustering arrogance drained out of him, leaving behind a frail, bewildered old man. He slumped on the sofa, his suit suddenly looking too big for him, his face a gray mask of defeat. He kept whispering, "My company, my father's company," to himself, a mantra of loss. Julian Croft, ever the opportunist, saw his opening not in confrontation, but in escape. He stood up slowly, attempting to project an air of nonchalance that failed spectacularly. "Well," he said, his voice thin and reedy, "this has been illuminating. Amelia, darling, I think this is a family matter. I should probably go." He didn't look at Ethan. He couldn't. He started to back away towards the foyer, a slow, crab-like retreat. "Julian!" Ethan's voice cut through the air, stopping him cold. Julian froze, his back still to Ethan. "Leave your car keys on the table," Ethan said calmly. "The lease on that Porsche is co-signed by a holding company that I own. It was a trivial business expense I approved as a favor to a friend of the family 6 months ago. That favor is now revoked. An associate of mine will be by to collect the vehicle in the morning. You can take a taxi." The final petty pillar of Julian's identity was kicked out from under him. The leased sports car, the symbol of his supposed success, was gone. He slowly turned, his face a mess of humiliation and rage. He fumbled in his pocket, threw the keys onto a side table with a clatter, and then, without another word, he turned and practically fled from the house. The sound of the front door slamming shut was a pathetic final note in his symphony of self-importance. Now only the three of them remained: Ethan, Amelia, and Marcus. The family unit fractured beyond repair. Ethan turned his attention back to the wreckage on the sofa. "Marcus," he said, his voice softening slightly, losing its hard corporate edge. "I am not a monster. I am not going to gut Thorne Industries and sell it for parts, though the numbers suggest I should. The company employs 3,000 people. Their livelihoods are not part of this equation." He paused. "I am installing a new board and a new CEO, a woman named Elena Rosales, one of the sharpest operational minds in the country. She will modernize the company and secure its future. As for you, you are retired, effective immediately. Vanguard will honor your contract. You will receive a generous severance package and your full pension. You will be comfortable. But you will have no power. You will have no say. Your career is over." It was a merciful execution, a golden parachute onto a deserted island. Marcus would have his wealth, but he would lose the one thing he truly cherished: his status. The respect and fear he commanded were gone. He was just another rich, retired old man. He looked at Ethan, a flicker of his old fire returning. "Why?" he rasped. "Why do all this?" "Because you left me no choice," Ethan replied simply. "You and Amelia brought this war to my doorstep. You judged my worth by a fictional standard and found me lacking. You have to understand, Marcus, respect is the only currency that truly matters. You tried to bankrupt me of it. You failed." Finally, he looked at Amelia. The tears were streaming down her face now, silent and constant. The shock had given way to a dawning, horrifying clarity. She wasn't just losing a lifestyle. She was losing the man she had never known she had. "Ethan, she started, her voice breaking. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." "That," Ethan said, his voice gentle but firm, "is the entire point. You should not have needed to know. You should not have needed a headline in the Wall Street Journal to treat your husband with kindness and respect. You shouldn't have needed a $34 billion valuation to see my worth. My worth as a man, as your partner, should have been inherent. You stood by and watched your father and your lover humiliate me. You participated. You banished me from my own bed. That has nothing to do with money." He walked over to the armchair they had designated for him and finally sat down. "The house is in my name. The cars, the accounts, everything. It's all mine, part of a personal trust kept separate from Vanguard. I am filing for divorce in the morning." Amelia let out a choked sob. "No, Ethan, please, we can fix this. I can fix this. I see you now. I see you." "You see my wealth?" he corrected her softly. "You see the power. You don't see me. You never have. And I cannot and will not live my life with a woman who needs a balance sheet to measure her love." Just then the doorbell rang. The sound was calm, steady, and precise. Ethan stood. "That will be my lawyer," he said. As he walked to the door, a man in a perfectly tailored suit entered. It was David Chen. He wasn't on the phone anymore. He was here, in the flesh, his presence a quiet, unshakable confirmation of everything that had just transpired. He was the unexpected ally, arriving not with a sword, but with a briefcase full of paperwork that would legally dismantle a life. David nodded respectfully to Ethan. "Chief." He then looked at the devastation in the room with a neutral expression. He placed his briefcase on the coffee table and opened it. "Amelia Vance," he said, his voice professional and devoid of emotion. "These are the preliminary divorce filings. Ethan is prepared to be more than fair. You will be left with the entirety of your father's original trust fund, as well as a one-time settlement that will allow you to secure a comfortable life. All other shared assets will revert to him." He slid a sheaf of papers across the table. The documents that would end her marriage, her life as she knew it. Amelia stared at them, unable to move, unable to breathe. The pleading began. The desperate, frantic bargaining of someone who has just lost everything and finally understands its value. "Please, Ethan," she begged, standing up, reaching for him. "Don't do this. Give me a chance, a real chance to prove that I can be the wife you deserve." Ethan looked at her, and the sadness in his eyes was vast. "The chance was the last 5 years, Amelia," he said quietly. "It's too late." He turned and walked out of the room, leaving her alone with his lawyer and the pieces of her shattered world. The months that followed were a study in quiet reconstruction. For Ethan, it was a period of shedding skin. The press tour following his revelation was short and decisive. He gave a single, extensive interview, confirming his story, outlining the philosophy of Vanguard Capital, and then, just as quickly as he had appeared, he retreated from the spotlight. He had no interest in being a public figure. The revelation had been a tool, a means to an end, not a debut. He sold the cold, modernist house they had shared, the one that had always felt more like a museum than a home. He moved into a penthouse apartment downtown, a space with warm wood, comfortable furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the sprawling, vibrant city. It was a place for living, not for performing. His greatest project, however, was not financial. He used a significant portion of his personal fortune to establish the Vance Foundation, a philanthropic organization dedicated to funding education and innovation in underserved communities. He stepped back from the day-to-day operations of Vanguard, handing the reins to David Chen, and poured his energy into this new endeavor. He was seen, not in the society pages, but visiting schools in struggling neighborhoods, talking to students, listening to teachers. The man who had built an empire on seeing value where others saw none was now applying that same skill to people. He was no longer EV, the phantom. He was Ethan Vance, philanthropist. He had finally integrated his two worlds on his own terms. For Amelia, the reconstruction was of a different, more brutal sort. The divorce was swift and clean. Ethan was, as promised, fair. The settlement was enough for her to live comfortably, but not lavishly. It was not enough to maintain the lifestyle of socialite grandeur she had craved. The house, the cars, the endless credit, it was all gone. Her friends, the sycophants who had orbited her perceived status, vanished overnight. She was no longer a valuable connection. She was a cautionary tale. She was forced to sell her designer clothes and jewelry. She moved into a small, modest apartment, a place that felt suffocatingly quiet after the cavernous emptiness of her former home. For the first time since she was a teenager, she had to get a job. She found work as an administrative assistant at a small marketing firm. The work was mundane, the pay was average, and her colleagues had no idea who she used to be. The humiliation was a fire that burned away the dross of her old self. Stripped of the external markers of her identity, she was forced, for the first time, to look inward. She began to understand what Ethan had meant. Her worth, her identity, had been entirely dependent on the admiration of others. Without it, she felt like nothing. The journey to build a sense of self from the inside out was painful and slow. There were days of bitter regret and nights spent crying for the man she had lost, not for his money, but for the quiet strength she had so profoundly misunderstood. There was no guarantee of redemption, but for the first time, the possibility of genuine change existed. Marcus Thorne faded into obscurity. He lived out his days in a luxurious retirement community, a gilded cage where he could bore other wealthy retirees with tales of his former glory. He had his money, but he had lost his name, his legacy, and the respect of the only man whose opinion had, in the end, mattered. He never fully comprehended his own role in his downfall, preferring to cast himself as the victim of a corporate shark, a narrative that allowed him to preserve the last, tattered remnants of his pride. One crisp autumn afternoon, about a year after the divorce, Ethan was walking through a public park near his foundation's office. He saw a woman sitting on a bench, reading a book. It was Amelia. She was dressed simply, in jeans and a sweater. Her hair was pulled back and she wore little makeup. She looked peaceful. Their eyes met across the expanse of green lawn. A flicker of panic crossed her face, followed by a quiet resignation. She didn't run. She simply closed her book and waited. Ethan changed his path and walked towards her. He stopped a few feet from the bench. "Hello, Amelia," he said, his voice gentle. "Ethan," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. The silence between them was not awkward or tense. It was filled with the weight of everything that had happened, but it was a quiet weight now, not a crushing one. "You look well," he said. It was true. The frantic, brittle energy was gone. In its place was a quiet stillness he had never seen in her before. A small, sad smile touched her lips. "I'm okay. I have a job. I have an apartment. It's quiet." She looked at him, her eyes clear and free of artifice. "I wanted to say, I'm sorry, not for what I lost, but for what I was, for not seeing you, for being a person who needed a balance sheet to see a man's worth. You were right, about everything." It was the apology he had never asked for, and the only one that mattered. Ethan nodded slowly. "I know." He wasn't forgiving her in a way that promised a future together. That bridge had been burned, but it was an acknowledgement of her change, a closing of the final account. "I wish you peace, Amelia." "You too, Ethan," she said. He turned and walked away, leaving her on the bench with her book and her new, quieter life. He did not look back. He was moving forward toward a future he was building not on profit and loss, but on purpose and principle. He had faced the ultimate test of his character, enduring humiliation with dignity, and had wielded his immense power not for petty revenge, but for a clear and decisive justice. He had proven that true strength isn't about the noise you make or the status you project, but about the quiet, unshakable integrity you hold within. The story of Ethan and Amelia serves as a powerful reminder that a person's true value can never be measured by their job title, their bank account, or the opinions of others. It resides in their character, their integrity, and the quiet dignity with which they carry themselves. Arrogance and pride, built on a foundation of superficial judgment, are fragile structures that can be brought down in an instant. But strength built on patience, principle, and a clear sense of self is a fortress that can withstand any storm. In the end, respect is not something that can be demanded or bought. It must be earned, And sometimes the most powerful people are the ones who have no need to prove it. What did you think of the choices Ethan made? Was his response justified, or did he go too far? We'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story compelling, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel for more tales of karma, justice, and redemption. Thank you for watching.